Sorry, I was muted the whole time and did not realize I was muted. But welcome everyone to the SAME Energy and Sustainability COI webinar titled Offsite Solar Project Complements Penn State's GHG Emissions Reduction Efforts. I am Tamel Harbison, and I will be in the background to assist with any technical issues you might experience today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. You have entered the platform in a listen-only mode, but we ask that you double-check your mics to make sure that they remain muted. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we ask that you ask those in the Q&A tab in your toolbar. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Energy and Sustainability webpage at a later date. And you are able to download the presentation today in the handout section. With that, I would like to turn it over to the COI chair, Michelle Sight. You now have the digital floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Tamel. So just welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our monthly webinar series, and we're really excited to have this presentation today. Did want to review a couple things with you. We have been asked to develop a white paper on energy resilience, specifically for the U.S. Coast Guard to help the SME National Office. If any of you are interested in participating in developing this white paper, please reach out to me. My email is msipe@lutron.com. I'm looking to host our first strategy session on Monday, probably early evening Eastern time. But whatever, mind share we can get on this topic that's super important for SCME and our military, please would love and welcome your participation. Also wanted to let you know that our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, September 16th. The Energy Management Association, who's an SCME strategic partner, will be doing the webinar topic for us, which goes around commissioning for reliability and some lessons learned from natural disasters. So I hope you can join us. And then last but not least, SAME Small Business Conference registration is now open. SAME is also looking for volunteers to assist with the conference. So please make sure you check that out and register. We will be having a face-to-face in-person meeting at the conference. So if you're attending, I look forward to meeting you there. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike, who is moderating this session. And I forgot, we have a couple poll questions, of course. Tamel, if you could launch the first poll. Just let us know who's out in the room. So it does look like we've got a mix of some large and medium business, a little bit of military, a little bit of civilian, some academia, so that's great. Next poll question is, have you done any offsite solar projects at your facility? And this is really just to help the doctor here know who's doing what. All right, so we have a lot more no's than we do yeses, just to keep that in mind. Okay, and with that, Mike, now I'm turning it over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. The presentation software is telling me not to turn on my video camera here, and while it's hard not to take that personally, I'm going to press on here and introduce our speaker, Dr. Sitzabee. Bill is a civil engineer, lifelong civil engineer who got his start at Norwich University in Vermont, and then promptly kicked off a long career in the Air Force. I first got to meet him, I think, Bill, in 1999 at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany. We got to work together there. A very exciting time to be an engineer. And I don't know if it's a coincidence, but after meeting and working with me, his career really took off like a rocket. After leaving Spangdahlem, he went to Air Force Institute of Technology, where he got his master's degree, followed not too much later by a PhD at North Carolina State University in civil engineering. And then after a distinguished 21-year career in the Air Force, he landed himself at Cornell University as the vice president of facilities. And after a number of years there, he finally associated himself with a decent university by landing at Penn State, where he is now get this top title right. Vice President for Facilities Management and Planning at the Pennsylvania State University. So, haven't teed all that up for you, Bill. Over to you, and thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, actually, I think it was right around 1999, and I think I see Eric Turner out there in the mix too, and he was running around with us back then in Spangdahlem as well. No, it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I'm Bill Sitzabee. I am the Vice President for Facilities Management and Planning at Penn State. I was asked to give a little bit of an overview of what Penn State is doing in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction, and then highlight a little bit about our offsite solar project. I thought I would just give a quick definition up front of what we're talking about when we talk about offsite solar. We're really talking about industrial scale or large scale commercial solar that really pumps right into the grid, and our power purchase arrangement we have with that, as opposed to distributed solar. And you would think about that would be more like rooftop solar that would come from different facilities and stuff. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. But it really is my pleasure to be here. I'll just give you a little bit of overview of Penn State at a glance. Penn State is a single university, so we're not a university system like you would see in North Carolina or SUNY up in New York. This is a single university with multiple locations. And so our flagship location is University Park. It really represents about 75% of the footprint when you think about it in terms of square footage and numbers of students. But we do have 21 Commonwealth campus locations, and like to say that we are within a 30-minute drive from 95% of the population of Pennsylvania to any one of our locations. Included also in that, we have the Dickinson Law School, plus the law school that's at University Park. We have the Hershey Medical Center and the Children's Hospital. So we run a large, the Penn State Health System is under the university's overall umbrella. We have an affiliate technical college called Penn College in Williamsport, primarily supporting trades. And so all in, it's 24 locations and a pretty big footprint. If I put this slide together, you can see some of our overall statistics, but we have a little over, it's right around 90,000 total students. If you think about just about half of them are here at University Park. We also have about 18,000 in our global programs or our online programs. So Penn State actually has a pretty robust online program. And when COVID hit, we actually flipped to that pretty easily because of the infrastructure. Overall, the university cares for about 23,000 acres of land. You can see the number of miles that we have in terms of roads and walkways. All in, there's about 33,000 plus employees within the Penn State system. And then my primary responsibility is really stewarding the 33 million gross square feet of space that we have. And that's represented by about 2,200 buildings in total, of which the average age of those are about 36 years old. So you'll see there's a great deal of the Penn State portfolio was constructed in two bow waves, the post-World War II and then the 70s. The post-World War II really was the GI Bill that put a lot of folks back into college, and there was a massive expansion in higher ed around that time. University Park itself, like I said, represents about 75% of the overall footprint of Penn State, but it also represents about 78% of our greenhouse gas emissions. We operate like a small city, as you can see on the slides. We have two central steam plants. We have a natural gas distribution. We run a central chill water that actually has 3 sub-plants to it. We do generate some of our electricity, and then we also purchase electricity. I think one of the interesting parts about Penn State in this area, if you're familiar with it, is that water is a really big deal. We primarily get all of our water from well fields, so it's groundwater. Run it through a first-class, relatively brand new water treatment facility, right through our system, and then goes to our sanitary water reclamation facility. And all of the effluent from the water reclamation facility actually gets pumped up a big hill and is put out on spray fields. So none of our water actually runs off into, none of our effluent from the treatment plant runs back into any open streams or anything. So it's a pretty complex, but really, really slick system overall. If you think about all the different ways a campus like ours uses energy 24/7, 365, we have a ton of student housing. We house a little over 16,000 students on campus. We have multiple dining facilities. Our faculty and researchers use all kinds of energy to support things like lasers, fume hoods, autoclaves, supercomputers, and much more. Also, if you think about Penn State, our athletic venue on any given football Saturday, myself and 200,000 of my best friends will be here on campus, and the amount of energy that's used to support that. When you consider all the unique facets of the university campus, our energy demands can actually equivalent that of about 30,000 residential homes. And like I said, here at University Park, make up about 78% of the greenhouse gas emissions for the university. There are two prominent goals that Penn State is targeting related to our energy and greenhouse gas emission reduction efforts. As part of our commitment to the U.S. Department of Energy Better Buildings Challenge, Penn State pledged to reduce its building portfolio energy usage by 20% over the next decade. Reductions occur through continuous commissioning programs, envelope improvements, efficiency upgrades in our lighting and HVAC systems. Penn State is committed to demonstrating that conservation is possible on a large scale by making it a standard practice in all of our retrofits and major maintenance work. The other goal we are committed to is the UN framework, the UN framework for Convention on Climate Change. In this goal, we've actually pledged to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 85% by the year 2050, and that's based off a baseline of the year 2005. So we have a pretty lofty goal, and I know a lot of other higher ed institutions are doing similar things, but when you compare the size and the scale of Penn State, the endeavor really is massive. On this slide, you can see in order to plan for a better future, we had to first look at, what is our baseline. And from 1990 to 2005, the university's greenhouse gas emissions were trending upward and were growing significantly. Back in 2005, we set our first greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, and that was to reduce our overall emissions by 17% by the year 2012. And I'm happy to report that we actually hit that, despite the fact that we continued to add square footage to our portfolio. This next slide, I think, is pretty slick, and I'm going to go through a few builds on this, so we'll talk a little bit more about it. But just to orient you, that top line that turns from blue to green represents the overall greenhouse gas emissions of the university, and it's really a build bar. So if you look at those bars, the red on the bottom represents our thermal loading that comes from our steam plants, the energy use there. The darker blue is our purchased electricity, and then the lighter blue represents the amount of greenhouse gas that comes from commuters. Those are really the three big portfolios. Obviously, there's a few other things in there, and you can see that on the legend on the side. What I think is really important is to think about, we put together a lofty goal. And the first was to reduce our overall footprint from our peak by the year 2012, and that's that 17.5%. That I had mentioned. We did this primarily through the addition of a combined heat and power plant that works off combustion turbine engines, and a really aggressive energy savings program that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And then we did take advantage of some renewable energy credits to advance that goal early on. By the year 2020, our goal was to hit that 35% reduction. And so we did this through a few other things. We were operating a coal-fired steam plant, and we converted. So we have two major steam plants. The one was the combined turbine that co-generates electric off natural gas. The other one was a conversion of a coal to a combined heat and power plant. And both of those have been accomplished to make a significant improvement in our greenhouse gas reduction. We also implemented some hydropower through a purchase agreement, and again, some other upgrades to the overall distribution system for our steam. Our next big goal actually is to hit that 52%, by the year 2030. And we are aggressively looking at that. One of our big wins is the power purchase agreement that I'll talk a little bit more about. And then to get to our overall reduction, I'm not sure if it shows up on there, but you can see on the very bottom of the slide, is to hit 85% from our baseline. And it's aggressive. And I think when you think about our overall strategy, there's a lot you can do on the demand side, the facility side, but also on the production side, and how do we do that? And as we thought about solar and purchased electric, we had to really think about how does that relate to our thermal needs? And if we look at opportunities in the future of replacing our steam plants, natural gas oriented steam plants with some other technology, we have to consider what would be the offtake of the electrical energy. So it's really a combined portfolio overall. On this slide here, you can see that I've mentioned that number 78% a couple times. And really, it shows you that our purchased electricity, because we do generate about 8.5 megawatts from our internal cogen plants, but there is a great big part of the portfolio is actually purchased electric, and that was really the genesis behind our offsite solar, our commercial grade solar. This chart here actually is pretty interesting, I think. If you look at it, if the top line would have been the projected greenhouse gas emissions that we were on path for, and each one of those color-coded wedges represent one of our major strategic investments in reducing energy overall. I'll call special attention to the sort of the purple and the darker purple programs. That's our energy savings program. And what that really is that's upgrades to LED lighting from traditional, that's envelope work, improved window work. It's heat recovery systems on our HVAC system, our HVAC. It's centralizing a lot of our chillers. So we had a lot of our facilities had distributed chillers throughout each building and getting on a central system. So while that takes a great deal of investment, centralized utilities are far more efficient than having built them distributed. The other one that I'll call to your attention is that dark red on the bottom, and that's our solar power purchase agreement. And you can see that really puts us below that 35% reduction, and a little bit of what I wanted to talk about today. So solar feasibility was really important to us. And if you think about it, we looked at what are the impacts in central Pennsylvania, where University Park is. We're in the middle of some of the best farmland in the world, certainly in the country. And so we looked at all kinds of opportunities. We looked at ground-mounted options for solar. We looked at roof-mounted options, even looking at opportunities to put solar over parking. And that was one of the genesis of the things that we looked at. One area that we actually did is we built a 2 megawatt solar array on University Park, and I can almost see it right from my office. It's in land that we own right next to our local hospital, and it generates 1% of our electricity, which really is not that significant in terms of the overall portfolio. But what we felt like we needed was a tangible win. We needed something that folks could see on a regular basis, and also access to research. And so the solar farm that we built, the 2 megawatt solar farm, you can see on the screen there's the hospital and the farm itself, actually uses a couple pretty neat things. It has access for researchers to get out there and look at the grid. We actually put some pollinator aspects to it, and we actually use sheep and cattle to manage the grass fields underneath. So sort of a good visible array close to campus to really show that living laboratory perspective that the university is driving for. One of the things, though, that I challenged our team is I said, hey, this solar array over by the hospital is great, but how can we do this on a more meaningful scale? And I challenged my team and said, so what would it take? And the basic answer is it would take about 1,000 acres of university land and about an $800 million investment for us to build our own on-site solar industrial scale replacement for electricity. And when we looked at that, it's just an investment that was more difficult for the university to make, and at the same time, meet one of our other major mission goals, which is affordable education for Pennsylvanians. And so I challenged the team. I said, "Hey, let's go out and see what we can do." There's a lot of high solar potential areas in Pennsylvania. So in 2019, Penn State entered into an agreement with Lightsource BP to construct 3 solar arrays that equate to 70 megawatts of power generation in rural Franklin County. It's about 90 miles south of University Park, but it's only a stone throw from our Mont Alto campus, pretty close to the Maryland border. We completed construction of this massive solar farm back in 2020, and Penn State now gets 25% of our statewide purchased electricity from this solar array. We structured this as a 25-year power purchase agreement. So some of you might be familiar with a public-private partnership arrangement. In this way, in order for the private partner to generate the capital to build it, we entered into a 25-year agreement to take off all of the electric generated here over the course of the life of the 25-year agreement. This process alone will actually reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 57,000 metric tons of carbon per year. That's the equivalent of about 12,000 fuel-burning cars a year. And we were able to do this by entering into this agreement and save the university on aggregate of about $14 million over the life. And that's based on our projections of what it would have cost us to buy natural gas generated electricity from the grid. What makes this project really significant was the overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time being able to save money for the university while providing opportunities for local farmers to have some revenue stream. And really unique to this is a very, very thoughtful biological diversity in terms of pollinator gardens for bees that are very important for farming in Pennsylvania, and the grazing land. So we struggle with making sure that we are balancing this great land that we have for agricultural use with the generation of solar electricity. I would say when you think about it as a triple bottom line, this is truly a triple bottom win for Pennsylvania. It's a triple bottom win for Penn State in terms of getting our electric generation from a sustainable source, promoting our farmers, and taking care of the planet in the process. What I did want to talk a little bit about the process, though, back in 2017 when I first arrived at Penn State, I challenged my team. I said, hey, let's take a look at this large-scale solar. And the initial response was that 1,000 acres and $800 million investment just wasn't a great idea. So we talked to a few partners, and we actually structured an RFP that we put out on the street with 6 major responses. And we had a weighted criteria what that would look like. We were open-minded as to where we could do this. There were several really good partners that we looked at. But one thing that was really important for us, being a land grant for the Pennsylvania State University, and being the land grant for Pennsylvania, is that something that was in Pennsylvania was really important to us. And Lightsource BP had won that RFP won that proposal through a weighted criteria. Matter of fact, in 2020, Penn State won the Sustainability Innovation Award from APA, which is the Professional Society for Higher Education Facilities. I'm happy to say that last October, despite the pandemic, we were able to keep this project moving forward. And in October, we flipped the switch, and we're now getting 100% of the power offtake from the solar farm itself. It's great to be recognized for our solar commitment, and it's even better knowing that 1/4 of all of our electric needs are powered by the sun. But this is just the work we're beginning. And like if I go back to that slide I showed you with our aggressive goals, trying to balance what our next big win will be important. We are looking for more industrial scale solar options for our electric generation, But at the same time, we're also exploring a significant investment in meeting our thermal energy needs. And then just this last, back in June, the president of the university, co-sponsored by me, had put forward a greenhouse gas task force that's made up with folks from my organization, academics throughout the university, students, and a few other stakeholders, to put together a thoughtful strategy to see if we can actually move up our 2050 goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050 by 85%. And we're just really wide open to what that looks like and the different kinds of investments we can do with that. And so with that, I'll pause there and see if there's any questions that I can answer, and really just open it up for a good dialogue. So Mike, I don't know if you or Michelle will mediate that or not.
Michelle, do you want to ask your question, since that's the one I see in the Q&A right now?
Yeah, I certainly can. I know. Yeah, keep your questions rolling in. We want to make this a dialogue, and it makes it a little hard to do this with obviously with this program. But I wanted to ask, like, how do you? I live in Pennsylvania, so I'm just very much intrigued, and we have a lot of farmland. So how do you start a conversation with a local farmer that you would like to use some of their land for a solar farm?
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is obviously a big concern, right? And because the last thing you want to do is displace somebody, and ultimately, Lightsource BP was the one that had to secure the land for it. But it really was a joint effort, and it started with conversations, typically with the local municipality, talking with the Grange and folks like that, and saying, where is their interest? Where would there be folks that want to do this? Obviously, you don't want to get into an embattled conversation. We actually found three partners. There were three different farmers that were looking to diversify their farming portfolio. And the land that's being rented that belongs to the farmer really was an agreement that starts with basically a grassroots conversation. You just have to get out and see what the feeling of the community is. Some folks are very much for it. Some folks are very much against it. And the last thing we want to do is enter into a partnership where you would have an embattlement about that. At the same time, there's a lot of farmers that are looking for a regular revenue stream, and having that rental income is important. I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but I mean, it really starts with knocking on doors and talking to folks and getting to know your local community. And that's a case where having our Commonwealth campuses, for example, in Mont Alto, we were able to, leverage some of those relationships that we already had. I also see the next question that's in the Q&A about, are you going to put in geothermal for HVAC? And that's a really interesting question. My time up at Cornell, we were looking at a large-scale, industrial-scale deep geothermal, so direct geothermal. I'm not sure how familiar you are with geothermal, but when you use geothermal, you're using the differential between the ground and the air temperature, and using a heat exchange and heat pumps basically to cause that differential to heat and cool. Direct source geothermal, we're actually taking, in the case of Cornell, was to go down about 5 kilometers, so 3+ miles deep, to hit hot bedrock. Basically inject hot water and pull it back up and use that as your sort of like you would as a heat source for your facilities. At Cornell, we used the lake source cooling, so we basically did the same thing using the lake as a cooling sink for our chill system. Here at Penn State and University Park, that's less of an option for us. When you think about the size and the scale of the footprint that you need for industrial-sized geothermal, it's not as practical, especially considering that our water comes from major well fields. And so we have to protect the water source for our potable and water use. Makes it a little bit more difficult. On-site or building by building geothermal or distributed geothermal is still a good option, and one that we're actually exploring at several of the campuses. Becomes a little bit more difficult in terms of an overall operations and maintenance. When, like I said, for solar or geothermal, when you have those distributed systems, you now have to figure out how to get that energy from the different sources. In this case, it would be by building, but it requires a major capital investment in the building to retrofit those, and becomes more practical with new facilities. I hope that answered your question. So Mike, I see your question. What's the university's relationship with the legislator, and how do energy efforts affect your budget? We actually have a really good relationship, I think, with the legislator and the executive branch. The governor was a strong supporter. There's a lot of budget that we get from, so Penn State is a state-related facility, not a true state facility. And so we get a portion of our budget from the Pennsylvania state, in which the governor has actually vectored some capital funds and operational funds to us. So I would say we have a really good relationship from that perspective. The governor was actually at the groundbreaking ceremony down in Franklin County for the Offsite solar. Okay, so I see, Kelly, you ask, will you reduce greenhouse gas emissions from your steam plants? That's the real challenge, and that's one of the challenges that the task force is looking at, and how to do that cost effectively. When you think about a steam system that's valued at probably $800 to $900 million in the distribution system alone, the retrofits would be problematic to go to, for example, like a geothermal, where you would have to convert from steam to hot water. In this case, we're exploring a couple different options. Obviously, nuclear has the density of energy to handle the steam system. Biomass plants also have the technical capacity to do that. But then again, those create a lot of large footprint. And so we're trying to figure that out right now. And then I see also, aside from the PPA, what other financing mechanisms did you explore? For the offsite solar, the PPA was the most beneficial for us. Most of our utility systems are funded under the university's capital improvements, so we basically foot our own funding and finance our own. We really don't borrow for most of those, but in some cases, the university does use bond funding to support some of those investments. The energy savings program, if that's what you're thinking about, our energy savings program is an internal bank that actually funds projects that have a 10-year or less payback. And so what we do is we look for opportunities to make those investments, and we really are borrowing against the cost of the utility against the operating budget. I hope that answers your question. It's a little odd because I can't hear the feedback directly. Crystal asks, you mentioned using sheep and cattle to manage the grass. Is that in and around the solar farm? Do panels get damaged? I haven't heard of any significant damages to the panels, and they're fairly robust from grazing. The sheep, I know, are really easy to deal with because they can get up under there. And I drive by our solar farm right here every day, and I see cattle in there, and I don't really see a concern. I'll tell you, one of the concerns for us initially with damage, especially with a commercial grade solar farm, and we had to structure this into an insurance agreement, is a major storm. So if you had a major hailstorm or a major tornado or hurricane or something that could damage the solar farm, the investment there was pretty serious for us, because we would have to switch from the guaranteed pricing to whatever the natural gas we would get off the grid. And so that was something we had to consider in the process.
Bill, I had a question. This is Mike. I'll just ask it instead of typing it in there. Penn State being a major university, of course, you've got a ton of technical capability, both on the academic side as well as on your own staff, of your energy efforts there. I guess how much is done kind of internally, organically with Penn State, just Penn State, academics or staff, and how much does the academic side get to touch any of this?
Yeah, so the answer is a lot. Our task force, I would say, is split probably heavier on the academic side than it is on the staff side. One of the major challenges with higher ed and using the technical capacity of your faculty and your researchers is they often operate on a different time perspective. A lot of times they're more interested in the output of the research as opposed to the operationalization of the of whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's one of my jobs, is to balance sort of the research input and all the big brains and actually be able to put something in place. And so often we have to balance the financial structure with the operational structure with the technology. And this is a case with utilities where we probably take a more conservative approach because we have to operationalize it and be good stewards of the finances. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Now I do have, a quite competent staff. Penn State actually operates a nuclear reactor. It's a research reactor. And I have several, doctorate level nuclear physicists that work for me that have to manage that. And we have some pretty technical folks that, so OPP, for example, has 1,500 people under my charge and a fairly significant in-house design capability that can look at a lot of that. So Michelle, I see you asked, how's my military experience help in your current role with Penn State? I would say significantly. I had a bit of a unique military career. I know a couple of you know it. I did a lot of operational stuff and then did a lot of academic stuff. And so in my current role running the Office of Physical Plant and Environmental Health and Safety, I would say a lot of what I did as a civil engineering officer in my career set me up to be very successful in leading a large organization, managing a lot of the programs, the facilities that I manage now, but also my academic experience through teaching at AFID and others, I think also allows me to understand the shared governance perspective that most universities have. And helped me transition pretty well. I actually think that military folks transition well into higher ed and other institutional-based programs like healthcare and things like that, because we take an institutional approach to how we manage our facilities as opposed to a developer or a commercial organization.
Thanks for that. It's always good to hear kind of that transition point. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and actually my last active duty tour was a ROTC commander at Cornell, and so I was able to use that time, I think, to develop some relationships and understand, a pure higher ed institution while still having the active duty hat. So that was a lot of fun. One of the better jobs I've had.
Okay, Michelle and Tamel, I think we are about ready to wrap up. So I just want to say thanks to Dr. Sitzabee for your time today, and thanks to the taxpayers of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for providing you to help us in this seminar. Last question for you. It's a tough one. Penn State football is if it depends who you look at, number 2 or number 3 betting favorite for the Big Ten championship. Would you prefer to see a Rose Bowl berth or a college football playoff berth for the Nittany Lions this year?
Oh, I don't know. I'm more worried about the stadium falling apart on me. So
or just beat Pitt.
I would love to see him in the Rose Bowl, but we all have to have realistic expectations. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. While we wrap up here, we have one last poll for you guys for our membership. We really would love your feedback on future webinars. And I know from here you can really only choose one, but please help guide our future planning for these webinars. It would be very helpful for us. And again, if you are interested in participating in that energy resilience white paper, please email me. My email is msipe, S-I-P-E, @lutron.com. Would love to have as many people participate as possible. So with that, really appreciate everyone being here today, and we will talk with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.